Or evening, depending where you're calling from. I'm Jeanette Grand. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Journyx. And we are going to go ahead and get started with our Journyx JX and PX customer training. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to talk about our newest release, which is version 13.5. It is our second half for 2025 and second half release. And so I'm going to turn it over in just a second to Meredith Zachritz, who is our Director of Product. Before we get going, just so you know, we are recording this, and we'll be sharing a link to the recording afterwards, probably within the next day or two. So keep a lookout for that. If you've got colleagues that weren't able to make it, or people that you want to share this with, feel free. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Meredith to start the training.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. Welcome, everyone. We'll just jump right in. One of the cool things going on right now with the Journyx, JX, and PX product lines is that we have a lot of different activities going on, both in the core product that you log into every day, as well as some of our add-ons on mobile, et cetera, or Scout AI, et cetera. So I've got a bunch of different things to talk about today. Some of the things I'll be showing you, and others I'll just be mentioning as references or things that you. We'll just take a look really quickly at what's coming tomorrow. So general availability for 13.5 is November 19th. And so should you be chomping at the bit to get this release, you can request with your account manager to update. Otherwise, we'll be doing batch updates in a few weeks for everyone who's on a current release, and we'll work with those of you who typically do some test rounds to schedule your update. But I'm going to show today a new Project Tree Selector on entry screens. And if any of you have ever used, the hierarchy selector that kind of looks like ASCII art with pluses and minuses for expand collapse, it's not the prettiest. So we'll look at something that's a little bit more modern and kind of allows you to keep track of where you are in some of these complex project trees. I'll also just show you again where we have our new REST API documentation. There's a central repository at docs.journyx.com, and we'll take a look at that. But coming tomorrow, we'll be publishing the new full sheet support in the REST API, and that is really kind of the biggest gap between the old SOAP classic API and REST API to date, and so it's going to kind of fill the gap for REST API and will allow those of you who do, push and pull data using the API to potentially move over from that SOAP API to REST for the things that you need to do. And the REST API sheet data is even outpacing the classic API with some of the things that it supports related to in-out times, job entry, leave requests, et cetera. So things that weren't even covered in the classic API. So that's really cool because it's more performant and easier to use. And so it's just a real resource. We'll also look at geofencing. And this is a new feature in your core product. We had added in the previous release the ability to optionally, of course, track locations. And this is generally a mobile use case, but it can be done in the browser as well. And so now what we've added in the release that ships tomorrow is the ability to actually enforce fences or locations for time, expense, or equipment entry. And it is, while it's primarily a time entry use case, there is the ability to also set these fences and location tracking for any kind of expense or custom equipment type entry as well. Then we'll look at, we'll move over to mobile just because a lot of this has to do with mobile use cases and which primarily be used in mobile, but we also have some mobile features around summarizing by project for approvers and some biometric quick sign-in options that are new. And then finally, if you haven't checked out Scout AI yet, we are continuing to add new types of data that you can ask about. You can ask Scout questions about your data. And you can see we've added entry comments and approval status, but we'll be continually adding to the various data types that you can include in your Scout data for Q&A with AI. So let's go ahead and jump over and start looking at some of this. And we'll start with that new project selector. So on everybody's time entry screen, there is this little project selector. And it is intended primarily for folks who are using multi-level project hierarchies. And like I said, it used to be very plain Jane. You had to double click to expand and click to expand. So it was kind of a, you know, a multi-click kind of view where you couldn't really see where you came from and what you were going to. And so with this new selector, you have a much richer set of data to look at that can help you if you use, for example, project numbers for the names, and the descriptions tell you more about what, you know, that project actually is. You can see all of this kind of data in this view. Anything that is in gray and italics means that you can't log time to that level. So in many cases, the customer or the parent, you don't log time to that level of the project hierarchy, and so it's set to reportable only. But you can, of course, select it to drill down to what is underneath it. So anything that's in black here is selectable. But if we go to one of the ones that is in gray, and again, we see our second level is also in gray, and we drill down until we get to something that is selectable. And my breadcrumbs for the hierarchy are maintained. And so I can see a lot more information. I'll show just some of the, you can also see, for example, the project descriptions in these various areas. So it just gives you a lot more information before you select the project that you're going to track your time against, whether it's at the project level, the phase or task level, whatever you call these levels. It allows you to see essentially what you're doing, and so that just makes it it's a much nicer experience for selecting through those complex hierarchies. And of course, you can still mouse over and see the hierarchy here. I will tease something here that we have that we're piloting, and should you be interested, you can let me know. But we are working a display feature that allows the hierarchy. So instead of mousing over here, for example, let me get that to reactivate. I could potentially have each of these selections in the hierarchy, so the top level, the customer, then the task, in a separate column for display. So there will be more coming on that, but we are in the pilot phase of that feature. And this makes sense for some folks who've come from, say, an ERP type project time tracking environment where these are displayed in a kind of a flat horizontal way. And we are working on a feature to make that usable for everybody, should that make it easier on your end users to see each of their selections in a column on the time entry screen. So that's the project selector. Go ahead and log out here and just show you very quickly. I mentioned that the REST API is now, as of the release that will be available tomorrow, has a much broader set of data that you can act upon, methods, endpoints, etc. It's really truly getting close to being fully functional and a replacement for the classic API that we've been developing for 20 years, a long time. So that's going to be really great for those of you who like to do things via the API. It also is more performant. It has batch handling. It has all kinds of features aside from the data itself that make it a better tool than the old SOAP APIs. And so you guys can go to docs.journyx.com, and there is both a developer guide up at the top, including tutorials. And this, as of tomorrow, this tutorial will include how to use the new sheet data methods that are being added in the 13.5 release. But then it also has the API reference, which is all of the different methods and endpoints that you can make use of in the Journyx REST API. We will be doing a deeper session on this in Q1 of 2026, and you'll receive information on how to participate. We are planning something a little more interactive where we have folks submit their questions ahead of time so that we can be prepared to address what you guys are most interested in learning. And this will be with our Chief Engineer, Preston Landers. So watch your inboxes for the Q1 session, and also feel free to contact me if you are interested in participating in that when we get it scheduled. All right, so let's go back and talk a little bit about geofencing, which is a broad new feature area available in Journyx JX and PX. It is not license key enabled, so it's something that you have access to at any time if it's something that you're interested in using. And I'll just show you really quickly where it lives under access to data. So this is where you've got your group management, your org chart, etc. There's a new option to manage geofences. And what you see here as, similar to any management screen you've worked with in Journyx before, are your existing geofences, and of course you can edit them and create new ones, etc. But there is a quick help at the foot of this screen that walks you through the basics. And if you read this, it'll pretty much get you off to the races and started. But essentially what it says here is that in order to have a user or a group of users be subject to geofencing, so in other words, they can only enter certain data when they're in a certain place, they need to be assigned to an entry screen that requires location tracking. And so let's look at that really quickly. All right. So here I have a time entry screen that I set up that's job entry with location tracking. And there are a variety of options here, but what we're interested in here is the location tracking options that you see here. So any screen that has enable location tracking allows users to optionally track location. And then you can also require location tracking. And in that case, it will block you from entering time, for example, on this is a time entry screen, unless you are tracking location. So we've got the enable on, and in this case, we're going to look at a mobile geofence case, as that is most common, but it is possible to track in the browser as well. And we've got it required for mobile tracking. As I mentioned, though, this isn't specific to time entry screens. If you wanted to do it, say, for an expense entry screen as well, say expenses can only be entered for some reason at the home office, whatever the use case may be, similar options are available here for expense entry, and same for custom entry. If you use custom entry, say, for equipment tracking or something similar, you can enforce location tracking for those screens as well. And then, of course, the way that you enforce that tracking is by assigning those screens to individual users. And today we're going to look at Stephanie, and you can see she's got the job entry with location tracking. So she's going to be required to track that location in the mobile app. I also want to show you just quickly some of the ways that you can build in exceptions to these geofences. So let's say, for example, so I've got my jobs here, and that's what we're going to take a look at with Stephanie, and we'll look at priority jobs as well in just a moment. But I might allow Stephanie to track her time off anywhere, and so she doesn't have to be in a fence to, say that she's off for the day, for example, which would make sense. So we have these options for where you can track these various projects and jobs. In this case, this is a placeholder for time off. and I can make it exempt from geofencing. So what that means is she can go in and log time off and, you know, pick that accrual or pay type vacation, and she can save that those hours from anywhere. The geofence will not be enforced in that case. So let's go back to geofences. And as I said, this is all covered in this quick help down here. What we're going to look at next is how we assign geofences to users or groups of users. And then we also have this concept of priority geofences. And the primary use case there is that, let's say, a project or job can only be worked in one place, but a user has multiple valid geofences, the home office, a couple, you know, places in the field, whatever the case may be. But a particular job or project can only be worked in one location. And so we can set a priority for that project or job, and the user will have to be in the proper location for that priority. But let's just look at creating a geofence. So we have a name and a description, pretty normal. We have a map, and you can click on the geofence and make it larger, smaller. You can change display color yeah, if you're picky about that or just want to see it in a different way. You can search for an address, so it defaults here to where our original home office was in Austin, but I can, you know, search for something in Manhattan and then set a geofence for that area. There's all kinds of ticky-tacky technical kind of accuracy settings that you are welcome to look into. I'm not going to go into those in detail, but we have some reasonable defaults right now in terms of minimum accuracy. Generally speaking, this style of geofencing with the circles, it's not, you know, if you're 2 feet from the building, it's not likely to enforce it accurately. This is more about fairly general areas, but there you can work to get set the minimum accuracy to something that works for you. And then I mentioned the priority. Like I said, we'll take a look at how that works, but that's when you have to be in a geofence, this specific geofence that we're setting up based on the parameters below. But as I mentioned, there are different ways to give any one person access to track time or expenses, etc., in a particular location. And one of them is to simply pick users. So we could do that, but I could also do a whole group. So anybody in these groups would be subject to this geofence. I could also base it on those time entry screens. So anybody with a job entry with a location tracking can track their time in this geofence, and so on with expense and custom. The jobs, like I said, on the whole are primarily about setting where specific jobs can be worked on. And so I'm going to show you, like I said, the kind of the user assignment to multiple geofences, but a job that's priority in one fence only. So let's go back out. Let's screen. That's fun. All right, so I have Stephanie, our user that we're going to take a look at in mobile, set to a home office. That's where I happen to be today, so it's going to let me track time. So she can always track time in this fence. And like I said, and I'm acting as Stephanie, and this is where I am today. But I have a priority fence set up for job 1. And what that means is Stephanie has access to job 1 on her time entry screen, but she has to be in Albuquerque to track that job. So I am not going to be able to get to Albuquerque while we're talking, so I'm going to show you what it does, what mobile does when she tries to log time to this geofence. All right, let's get mobile queued up. maybe. There we go. All right. So this is Stephanie. We're on mobile and she's subject to geofences. I'm in the home office geofence right now, but I'm not where I can track job one. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. Search for job one here. All right. So this is the first time I've tracked time in this app, and it's just double checking to be sure I know that it's asking to track my location, which we know that because that's the way Stephanie is set up. So go ahead and allow it to track location. So now I'm going to try to start this job. And what we'll see is a violation. Now I do appreciate that there's a job stop successfully message that's in green there, and we will be getting rid of that. But it is a function of what's happening under the hood. But the yellow message says, hey, you're not where you're supposed to be. And so you can't track to that job. So let's move on and track to something else. I'll pick one that I've used before right here at the top, where I don't have a priority geofence. I just have to be in one of my valid geofences to track time. So we do that. And there we go. And so we have our job started successfully. So this is what geofencing looks like. As I said, the messages there's an erroneous green message that says a job was stopped that we will be ditching. I also plan to make some changes to the flashing message where it persists so that end users are able to read it at their leisure, but it will notify and tell you that there is a violation, and so you can't start that job. Now, one of the other features that I mentioned in mobile, we went ahead and set up Stephanie here so that she is both an approver and tracking time herself, is this ability to see your the sheets that you approve summarized by project. And I don't know how many of you guys have used the approvals on mobile before, but the default up until now has been to show totals by day, as you see here. And obviously, mobile screens are not large and you can't show all of the detail, although you can certainly, click down into a day and see more detail. But what a lot of people do is validate for project hours, which makes sense, given that many of you are tracking project time. And so you'll see up at the top, the by project slider. We can turn that on. And then it's going to summarize that period by project or job in this case, because that's what Cody's tracking. And so if we were to slide over here to somebody else, let's see, there we go. We could also summarize by project here on Dylan's screen. So this is something that you can turn on and off. It will remember what you last had it set to. So if you always want to see your project, your sheets for approval summarized by project, then you can just leave this on, or you can turn it on and off to see both views. And this is available for expense approvals as well. And you can see I left this one on, but I can turn it back off to see by day. So that's a handy view to see what you need to see quickly in approvals in mobile. All right. So let's stop sharing here.
Meredith, we have a question about geofencing. Do you want to answer them now or you want to wait?
Let's see. Yes, let's go ahead and do that now because the last thing that I'm going to show is the sign in shortcut. So go ahead.
Okay. Question is, what is a good example for using geofencing? What's the valid user case? Listen to how it's set up, but my mind is going to why would someone use this? We're glad if somebody submits their timesheet on time, no matter where they are.
Yeah, so this is primarily a field service use case, so people who are out in the field as a matter of course. And so what will happen is, they get assigned jobs, and those jobs can have to be, the time might be billed back to, say, a customer, but they can't actually work those jobs unless they're on site. And so geofencing is about making sure that when they log their time, or when they start and stop a job, for example, that they are in fact where the work needs to be done. And then there are other cases where there might be like travel time or reporting time, where they could be in the home office, or they could be outside of a fence, let's say for travel time. But it's really about making sure that things are worked in the places where they would have to be worked. And so it's a type of employee that's traveling around, generally speaking. I will say that I've had some interesting requests around remote employees, and making sure, and this is more about browser entry, not necessarily mobile, but making sure they are working in a state where they're generally allowed to work, because there are local regulations and prevailing wages and other things that have to be taken into consideration if somebody is working for any length, in another place, in another state, in another country, etc. And so the location tracking can be helpful for that use case as well. But it is primarily a field service use case where people are out in vehicles going from site to site, and it helps them to track their data accurately, for one thing, that they don't pick a job that's not relevant to where they are. But then it also ensures auditing for making sure that the work occurred where it's allowed and available.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I want to go back to something that I mentioned that fairly well concludes our geofence overview. Obviously, if you have more questions about how to implement this, or how the different things that it can be used for, we'd be happy to discuss those further and walk you through those. But it is a mobile field service use case primarily, but I have had some, in discussing this with clients, I've had some other interesting applications for it. But the last thing I want to show you for mobile has to do with another use case that came from customers who had folks logging out of their apps, out of basic hygiene, but not being able to get back in quickly with biometrics. And so what we want to do here is just show that there's a setting. If you want to be able to get your users back in quickly and easily, I probably should have gone and looked up where this setting was before I got here, or I'm overlooking it. Shoot, I really thought it was right here. I must be missing it. I'll send it to you guys. There is a setting for mobile that allows you to let people sign back in quickly if they have biometric login enabled. So this isn't a log out and people can log back in unsecurely. It's when there's biometric enforcement in place. They already have biometrics set up, and I'll just show you how that works. Share my screen. If I can get the screen up, sorry. There we go. So what we see here is a login screen with my Face ID enabled. And so you can tell because there's a little Face ID icon there below the login. And so if I have Face ID enabled with fingerprint enabled as well for Android, etc., then I can just click on that Face ID and it's going to let me back in even though I logged out. So if you don't have that setting turned on, what will happen when you log out is you'll have to enter at the very least your password again, and you may have to enter both your login name and your password again. If you have no biometrics turned on, you will always have to enter your login name and your password again. But in this case, as you can see, I have sign in with Face ID turned on, and so if I log out, I can essentially, it basically does not log me out. It allows me to use biometric sign-in to bypass having to enter any of my credentials again. And so if you are a regular user of the mobile app, I'm sure you can imagine makes life a lot easier if you don't have to continually enter your credentials each day to get back in, or if it, if you've got session timeout every hour, etc., makes it a lot easier to log back in. So like I said, I'll find that setting for you. It's probably there and I'm just running through it too quickly. And so the last thing that I mentioned that I just want you to be aware of is our Scout AI engine. That's our large language model, ask questions of your data option. If you haven't tried this out and you are interested, please contact your account manager and we can work to get you set up. Fine-tuning your prompt so that it answers your questions is a quick 2-hour pro services engagement where we just ask you a few questions and do a little work and have you try it out. And if it comes back the way you want it, it's great. Or if it's not quite doing what you want, then we can tweak it and make sure that it's answering the types of questions that you're interested in. We did start out with a fairly limited data set, primarily around records, time records, expense records, but we are continually adding new data sets that allow you to answer questions. And this is available, once we turn it on for you, this is available in your reporting menu under Analyze and JX. So let us know, and then of course you just start asking questions about whatever it is that you want to know. We have recently added the entry comment, which wasn't originally in there. And so if you're one of those folks where you have a use case where you have people put kind of specific information in the comment that helps you understand what they did, or you may even have a PS tool that does that, you're able to ask questions about specific, kind of keywords in your comments to take a look at your data. And then we also added, or in testing, to add approval status so that you can look at approved versus unapproved time for patterns or questions that you have. All right, so that wraps up our demonstration. As I mentioned, the 13.5 will be available starting tomorrow, and you'll be notified when our IT department schedules batch upgrades. If you are on an eligible release for upgrade, you can also request a demo site if you want to check it out first, or a test site if you'd like to start working on scheduling your upgrade to 13.5. As with all of our major releases, our feature releases, we also follow on with a maintenance release. And so we'll have a maintenance release out for 13.5, so 13.5.1 by early February at the latest. So you can keep your eye on that as well. If you're one of those folks who prefers to wait for the first maintenance release, we'll have that available early Q1. So at this point, I'll open up the floor for any more questions.
If you have any questions, just go to the question mark up above and enter them now. We've got one additional question. Do the biometrics work only on Apple or Android as well?
They work on both. The tool that I use to screen share the Android app won't let me show login screens for security reasons. So I couldn't show it to you on my Android app. Super fun, all the tech tools. But yeah, it works on both of those.
Perfect. Thank you much. In the good old days, we let customers sign a paper when they leave the site, agreeing that the work was done. How much? Yeah, that's why we exist. Try to get away from all of that paper shuffling, right?
Yeah, and if the customer actually, if you let the customers do a level of approval for time, I didn't show this, and if you're, we'll just leave it for now, but essentially there's a little paperclip icon and or where the notes and attachments are, the little triangle that you've probably seen for notes and attachments. And so customers who are approving sheets, if you let them approve the, the final level or first level, whatever the case may be, they can click on the entry and see where the person was when they entered the time. So that's kind of cool. They can look at a map or whatever the case may be, but or the coordinates. But that is visible throughout the process. The end user can see it on their entry screens, that we can see in reports, we can see it in the approver screens or the crew entry and timekeeping screens. So that's all available.
So you were showing in one of the first screens where you were showing the hierarchy. If they are outside of a geofence, they won't be able to select any of those projects that are not in that geofence, correct?
Right. And likewise, if they're in no geofence at all, the only things they'll be able to track against would be projects that were geofence exempt, like the time off. So right. You could say that this person has to always be in a geofence unless they're logging time off or not. There's flexibility on that.
Yep. Makes sense. Let me see if there are any other questions. No, I guess not. So, so to wrap this up, just so you know, we will be sending out a recording in the next several days. And so feel free to share this with anybody. We'll post it on our website as well. Anything more from you, Meredith?
I don't think so. You guys have a great day.
Have a great one. Bye, guys.